Thank you. My name is John Atwood, and I am an acting commissioner of the Public Utilities Commission, sometimes known as a temporary commissioner. As my colleague Justice Rudman has done, or Commissioner Rudman has done, I plan to read my perspective and opinion about the pending contract. In this case, Fryeburg Water Company, which I'll refer to as either FWC or the company, seeks approval of a new agreement to convey water from its well number 1 exclusively to Nestle Water Company of North America, which I'll refer to as either Nestle or NWNA. This agreement, known as the 2012 agreement, would supersede and replace the current contract between these parties or their affiliates, which was entered into in 1997, which I'll be referring to as the 1997 agreement. Although the company originally asserted that PUC approval of this contract was unnecessary, it has acceded to the PUC's exercise of its authority to supervise the contractual relationship between these two entities. Moreover, several interveners have actively participated in this case and have generally objected to the terms of the 2012 agreement. These interveners include some citizens from the Fryeburg area and Food and Water Watch, which I'll refer to as FWW, an advocacy organization. For its part, Nestle has declined to intervene or participate as a party in this case, apparently satisfied to have FWC serve as the advocate for PUC endorsement of this new agreement. Consistent with its responsibilities, the Office of Public Advocate, which I'll refer to from time to time as OPA, has been active in this case, arguing generally in favor of PUC approval of the new contract and advocating for a version of same which would incorporate a stipulation between it and the company entered into on May 1, 2013. Said stipulation was rejected by the permanent commissioners because there was not a sufficiently broad spectrum of interested persons involved in its negotiation. For the reasons set out herein, this temporary commissioner would approve the 2012 agreement as modified by the stipulation cited. A brief history of the case. As reflected in the memoranda, it may be said that the company has its origin in the 19th century when it was chartered by the legislature to, quote, convey to the village of Fryeburg and vicinity a supply of pure water for domestic and other purposes. This comes from the Private and Special Laws of 1879, Chapter 177. Apparently it has been engaged in this business since then, expanding its service to East Conway, New Hampshire. In 1997, the company entered into an agreement with Pure Mountain Springs, LLC, which I'll refer to from time to time as PMS, to supply it with untreated water from what is known as well number 1. The PUC approved that arrangement in docket number 1997-00533. It is understood that PMS sold that water to NWNA with a markup in price. The affiliated relationship between PMS and FWC was dissolved with PUC approval at docket number 2008-00052. Under the same docket number, the PUC anticipated that the ownership of PMS would be transferred to NWNA. Accordingly, under the 1997 agreement, FWC would supply water directly to NWNA from well number 1. It is further understood that if the 2012 agreement were to be rejected, the terms of the 1997 contract would continue to bind the parties, subject to their rights to cancel as expressed in that contract. In that regard, in August 2008, FWC gave Nestle a 5-year notice of cancellation, as that agreement would provide. That event apparently prompted the parties to negotiate a new agreement, the 2012 agreement, which is here under review. This new agreement, however, would not change the circumstances that the 1997 agreement would continue to apply if the 2012 agreement were to be rejected by the PUC. A further, more precise recitation of this history is not necessary for this deliberation, except to note that the hearing examiner has issued a report detailing his recommendation that the PUC decline to approve the 2012 agreement. FWC and the PAO have timely filed exceptions to the hearing examiner's report. Two citizen interveners, Anita Hafford and William Harriman II, have submitted a document expressing their concurrence with the hearing examiner's report. The remaining interveners did not further participate. With these filings, the case is in order for deliberation by the two temporary commissioners. This commissioner wishes to note his appreciation for the high quality of the submissions, which will assist in the ultimate disposition of this matter. Next, I want to turn to the merits. First, the standard of review. This temporary commissioner concurs with the assertion that the acceptability of the 2012 agreement must be evaluated by asking whether the contract will neither be adverse to the public interest nor inconsistent with the interests of the company's ratepayers and investors, citing PUC order docket number 1997-00533. This is sometimes called the no net harm public interest standard. See exceptions of the Public Advocate Office, page 14, note 28. In the view of this temporary commissioner, the cited standard has been met and the proposed 2012 agreement, as modified by the stipulation signed by the Public Advocate Office and the company, is not adverse to the public interest nor inconsistent with the interests of FWC's ratepayers and investors. Indeed, as argued by the Public Advocate in its post-hearing brief, the 2012 contract is more beneficial to FWC and its customers than the 1997 agreement. It also meets the standard cited herein for approval, namely that its net effect for ratepayers and investors is positive in comparison to the PUC approved 1997 agreement. This new agreement also does not violate any legitimate public interest made known in these proceedings. Turning next to the agreement itself. While a detailed comparison of the two agreements might be useful, this has already been accomplished in the parties' 2013 post-hearing briefs, so need not be restated here. That said, there's at least one substantial improvement in the 2012 agreement over the 1997 contract. Thus, under the new agreement, FWC would receive a higher guaranteed level of revenue from Nestle than it does under the current arrangement. That is, FWC is to receive on an annual basis a guaranteed minimum of $144,000 or $12,000 per month in rental payments and revenue from, at a minimum, 75 million gallons of water, or about $80,000. See the Public Advocate's post-hearing brief, page 3, footnote 7. This compares favorably to the current guaranteed minimum of $400 per annum. Further, according to the Public Advocate Office analysis, had the 2012 agreement been in effect in 2008, the increase in net revenue for that year through 2013 would have been $257,540. See corrected comments, page 7. Indeed, as expert Scott Rubin has testified, under the 2012 agreement, FWC could expect to see annual benefits of between $45,000 and $70,000 a year. See transcript of September 3rd hearing, page 86. Obviously, these substantial increases in revenue are likely to benefit the company and its ratepayers. None of this is to say that the originally proposed 2012 agreement is ideal. Indeed, the Public Advocate Office enumerated the issues with the new contract in its corrected comments of February 20th, 2013, page 10, and its brief of October 1, 2013, page 4 and following. They may be restated in part as follows. First, the reduced marginal costs of water when Nestle greatly exceeds its anticipated purchases may have adverse effects on the water source. This risk under the new agreement would be extant for at least 25 years. Second, control of the supply of water at the aquifer needs to be carefully monitored, and FWC must have the unambiguous right to suspend deliveries to Nestle when necessary to service the needs of its residential or principal customers. Third, the PUC must have the right to investigate Nestle's water on its own initiative. It should also have the right to order suspension or termination of Nestle's use of well number 1 if necessary to protect FWC's obligations to serve its regular customers. Fourth, the term of the lease is long, 25 years with renewal options up to 20 years more. According to the Office of Public Advocate, this ought to be modified to a base term of 20 years or less with renewal options of 5 years or less. It is to be noted that the majority of these issues reflect concerns that via the new agreement, Nestle Water North America will have the legal means to draw down copious amounts of water from the Wards Brook aquifer, which may threaten the viability of that resource for the delivery of water to other customers. While these concerns are legitimate in that from 2008 through 2012, NWNA has been withdrawing between 73 million and 110 million gallons of water annually, the Emery and Garrett report, which is uncontradicted, included in the record shows that the sustainable yield of the aquifer is 220 million gallons per year. So while there is reason to believe that the Wards Brook aquifer can accommodate substantial withdrawals of water, prudence has suggested that these withdrawals be carefully monitored to assure that other customers' use of this water resource will not be compromised. Thus, the contract alterations proposed by the Public Advocate Office, to which FWC has agreed, along with the enhanced guaranteed revenue to be paid by NWNA, satisfies the standard for approval of this contract, namely that it causes no net harm. Next, I want to turn to the hearing examiner's report. The hearing examiner prepared a well-written, comprehensive argument recommending that the 2012 agreement not be approved. While this commissioner concurs generally with the hearing examiner's recitation of the procedural history of this case, it sustains for the most part the exceptions filed by the Public Advocate Office and the company, and therefore declined to endorse its recommendation. And let me take each of these in the order that I have outlined. First, with reference to pure water. Addressing the hearing examiner's contentions in his report, one comes first to the argument that because FWC by its corporate charter is to convey pure water for domestic and other uses, its delivery of untreated, i.e. less than pure water to Nestle, is beyond its corporate purposes and is ultra vires because it is not performing the utility service authorized by the legislature. This assertion rests on the proposition that pure water is defined by more recent federal legislation which dictates that drinking water must be treated for that purpose. Thus, the reasoning goes, because the water Nestle buys is not treated for drinking by FWC, it is not pure and cannot be conveyed under FWC's charter as a public utility. To accept this argument, one must assume that a federal statutory definition of drinking water is to be imposed upon a generalized term found in the state private and special statute enacted over a century ago. However, no case, statute, or other precedent is cited or offered to support the contention that pure water for domestic and other uses, as those words were understood in the 1870s, must mean treated drinking water as defined by Congress in the 1970s. Instead, a more reasonable definition of pure, as used in its original statute, would simply be that it is unadulterated, or in the context of water for human consumption, uncontaminated or unmixed, citing Webster's Third International Dictionary. Such water certainly may be found in aquifers and might safely be used for domestic and other uses, the likely concern of the legislature more than 100 years ago when water treatment by national standards did not exist. In this regard, I want to concur with Commissioner Rudman's analysis as well of the applicability of the word pure as it was originally found in the statute. Moreover, as argued by the submitted exceptions, rules of statutory construction require that the legislative intent be carried out and that, quote, some flexibility is essential in the proper interpretation of statutes. When words used in a statute have more than one recognized meaning, the sense in which they are used by the legislature may be ascertained by consideration of the subject matter and the object accomplished. It is the spirit of the law which controls. Citing exceptions of Fryeburg Water Company, page 11, citing further Atchison versus Johnson, 86 Atlantic 2nd, 628, pages 630 through 631. In the view of this commissioner, only a strained reading of the founding legislation in question would require the word pure to mean treated drinking water as opposed to water useful for all other purposes as the statute prescribes, i.e. for domestic and other purposes. Citing Private and Special Law 1883, Chapter 268, Section 1. In my view, this must reasonably include water that has not been treated to meet modern federal drinking water standards. Next, I'd like to turn to the use of the word convey. The hearing examiner makes another definitional argument in his interpretation of the word convey in the original law, which authorized the establishment of the company, that is, to, quote, convey to the village of Fryeburg a supply of pure water for domestic and other uses, end quote. According to the hearing examiner, PMS was, quote, conveying water to Nestle under the 1997 agreement because PMS and later FWC controlled the transport of the water to NWNA, thereby conveying it. Under the 2012 agreement, however, because NWNA controls the withdrawal and transport of the water, FWC is not conveying water to this customer. In the view of this commissioner, this is an unreasonably restrictive definition of convey or conveying. Instead, because FWC is selling the water as part of its service obligation to its customers, including Nestle, a more reasonable interpretation of convey in this context is to sell or transfer title to an object or thing, here water, from the utility to the customer, whether it be a large company such as NWNA or a residential customer in the village of Fryeburg. It is to be remembered that water is this utility's principal resource, and that it is in the business of selling, i.e. conveying elements of this resource to customers. To be sure, conveying here may also include transporting or delivering, as the hearing examiner has argued, but that approach cannot logically exclude the transfer, that is to say, the conveyance of water to a customer who, after all, is buying the water itself, whether or not it needs the advantages of transport services. Turning next to the discussion of ultra vires. According to the hearing examiner, because FWC is not providing pure water to NWNA, nor is conveying that water to this customer, its proposed contract to do so is ultra vires, that is to say, beyond its corporate authority, and therefore an illegal agreement. As explained herein, because FWC proposes to sell or transfer, i.e. convey unadulterated or unmixed, i.e. pure water to NWNA, it may legally do so within the terms of its legislative charter. Excuse me. Moreover, as argued in FWC's exceptions, the doctrine of ultra vires has been superseded by the Maine Business Corporation Act. That is not to say that FWC is beyond the reach of regulatory authority. That is, if FWC were to engage in the conduct of its utility business that was illegal or unauthorized by the law which governed public utilities, it could, of course, be enjoined therefrom. In the view of this commissioner, however, the company's conveyance of unadulterated, i.e. untreated water to NWNA does not constitute an illegal aspect of its business. Turning next to the concept of a special contract. Relying on two statutory provisions in our public utilities law, the hearing examiner offers further arguments why the 2012 agreement should be rejected by the Commission. 35 MRS, that's Maine Revised Statutes, Section 309 provides that a public utility is prohibited from charging, quote, for any service performed by it within the state or for any service in connection with that performance, a greater or lesser compensation than is specified in such printed schedule as may at the time be in force. Because NWNA is purchasing untreated water at the same tariff rate as others are paying for treated water, the reasoning goes, it is a special contract. Moreover, because NWNA in effect pays for water it does not receive when it takes less than the contractual minimum, it is paying more for water than the tariff rate which applies to other customers. It is conceded that when a large customer pays a rate above the tariff rate, which may benefit other ratepayers, that above tariff price is not offensive. See the hearing examiner's report, page 19. Thus, it would follow that when NWNA pays the same for untreated water as others pay for treated water, or when it accepts less water than the guaranteed minimum purchase, such an agreement is approvable as a special contract pursuant to 35 MRS Section 703. Thus, the circumstances in this case do not entail a customer paying less than others, rather the opposite. Accordingly, the proposed contract does not require approval under 35A MRS Section 703(1), which provides, among other things, that a utility may not provide any rebate, discount, or discrimination in respect to any service rendered, or for any related service where the service is rendered, at a rate less than named in the schedules in force. This is because, as noted, NWNA receives no rebate or discount. It pays the same tariff rate as FWC's other customers, except under the circumstances cited above, where it pays more, which entails, it must be noted, a benefit to the company and the ratepayers. Thus, to the extent that Section 701 through 703 apply to this transaction, it is approvable because NWNA is receiving no rate or tariff benefit in its purchase of water from FWC via the base contract. Turning next to discriminatory provisions. The hearing examiner also advances the argument first promoted by intervener FWW that the proposed contract discriminates against other potential customers because NWNA is given exclusive control over well number 1 and bars FWC from engaging in bulk sale of water to any other customers. Such circumstances, it is argued, violates Section 703 as above as discriminatory. This commissioner finds that the granting of the lease to well number 1 and the equipment attendant thereto is non-discriminatory because it gives NWNA no better access to the Wardsbrook aquifer than other customers may have through FWC's access to this water supply via well number 2. Additionally, the prohibition against discriminatory utility practices articulated at Section 703, paragraph 1, is addressed to providing services at discounted rates. Because, as noted herein, Nestle is not paying for services at advantageous rates, the proposed contract is not discriminatory in this regard. That said, however, the language of Section H of the recitals of the 2012 agreement states, in consideration of NWNA's agreements contained herein to make certain payments to FWC, FWC covenants herein during the term of this agreement not to sell untreated water to any other person or entity. See also the 2012 agreement, paragraph 3D, last sentence. In the view of this commissioner, barring another potential customer from buying what this utility is authorized to sell plainly violates Section 703(1). That similar language appeared in the 1997 agreement. The fact that similar language appeared in the 1997 agreement, or that such other customers may not at present be interested in FWC's untreated water, is of no consequence. FWC cannot represent itself as utility and bar other customers in favor of one with whom they have a current business relationship. Indeed, assuming that FWC's aquifers have the capacity to serve other bulk purchasers of their water, one or more additional such customers would increase revenue to the advantage of the owners, investors, and ratepayers. The bar then would be inconsistent with their interests and the interests of the public. In my view, recital H in paragraph 3D, last sentence of the 2012 agreement must be stricken in order to receive PUC approval. Turning next to Section 1101. The hearing examiner asserts that the proposed agreement is subject to scrutiny under Section 1101 of Title 35A. That statute provides that a public utility must secure an order of authorization from the PUC before it may sell, lease, assign, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of or encumber the whole or part of its property that is necessary or useful in the performance of its duties to the public. Citing 35A MRS Section 1101, subparagraph 1, subparagraph A. Transactions involving property that do not materially contribute to the ability of utility performance duties in the public are exempted, citing the same statute at subparagraph 4. Well number 1 and its attendant equipment are leased to NWNA and gives it access to the Wardsbrook Aquifer, the same aquifer from which FWC may draw water via well number 2 to serve other customers. The record in this case would tend to show that, thus far, this aquifer generates or holds sufficient water to satisfy NWNA's needs under the proposed contract, but its use needs to be carefully monitored, and that FWC must have effective means to curtail the former's water use in cases of emergency or when the company's ability to supply its other customers is threatened. This is especially true under the proposed agreement, whereby NWNA can draw water beyond the guaranteed minimum. All this being so, it appears beyond debate that NWNA's access to Wardsbrook Aquifer via its leased well number 1 entails property rights that are necessary or useful in the performance of FWC's duties to provide water to its customers and ratepayers. Again, citing 35A MRS section 1101, subparagraphs 1, subparagraph A. This conclusion does not mean that the 2012 agreement ought to be rejected. Instead, the inquiry in this case must simply include the consideration of whether or not this lease of property is necessary or useful in the performance of FWC's duties to the public, and if so, ought to be authorized. The standard to be applied in resolving this question is the no harm standard cited above. In the view of this Commissioner, because of the efforts of the parties, including the Public Advocate's Office, to ensure that Fryeburg Water Company and the PUC can monitor water levels at the Wardsbrook Aquifer, and the public has access to those records, and that they may interrupt NWNA's use of water there under the circumstances cited in the 2012 agreement and the 2013 stipulation. The lease of FWC's property ought to be authorized, and it is not, as modified, adverse to the public interest, nor inconsistent with the interests of FWC's ratepayers and investors. One last correction. Paragraph 3F of the proposed agreement gives NWNA and its invitees the right of full and unimpeded access to any premises, underscore the word any, owned or leased by FWC, including but not limited to the spring from which well number 1 draws water. This Commissioner sees no compelling reason to grant NWNA such blanket authority to access the company's property, especially for a term of up to 45 years. In conclusion, this temporary Commissioner would approve the 2012 agreement as modified by the May 1, 2013 stipulation, but would strike therefrom paragraphs 3D and F, which respectively bar FWC from entering into other contracts to sell untreated water, and gives NWNA broad authority to enter upon FWC's other properties.
I would concur with your suggested changes. I interpreted contract to apply only to well number 1. Now I concede that, let's make it clear that the Nestle has access to well 1, but not to the other wells. Seems to me that Nestle should have control. They're going to take the water and they're going to bottle it and sell it. And they ought to be assured that making this, by selling it under their label, that in some way something else happens to the water. So if we leave the exclusivity to well 1, and the water company is free to sell water from other wells and future wells, which the agreement contemplates they will seek. Does that sound reasonable?
It does. So I take it you're agreeing as well that the provision of the contract which bars FWC from selling water to other bulk purchasers, untreated water other bulk purchasers, ought to be stricken as well.
Yes.
Okay. In that case, I think it sounds like we concur in every important respect to the disposition of
We do. Thank you. We have nothing further. Does staff have anything further?
No, thank you, all set.
Okay.
John,
Adjourned?
yeah, adjourned.
Adjourned.
The conference recording has ended.
Now, you made Matt's job easy. Why don't you give that to Matt?